We want to be free. We want to do what we want to do. We want to have a good time. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to have a good time.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Bygone Bros. I'm once again joined by my bro, Trevor White. How are you doing today, Trevor?
I'm doing well. Hello.
And yours truly, this is Kyle White, tuning in here as well. And we've got another great episode planned for you guys today. This one is a topic that I've been thinking about for a while. I think it's something that's maybe in this current era more relevant than ever. And it's the way in which we stay in touch. And so I guess kind of if I were to sort of pick a general theme for today's conversation, it's like communication technologies. Like what are the ways we stay in touch with each other, the devices and the modes of communication, and how have those changed since, I guess we'll rewind back to maybe like, late 80s, early 90s when we were very young, and try to walk through some of the major changes that we experienced in our life and up to present day. So starting back when we were wee little lads, there was, of course, the landline phone, which is probably very strange to hear about from if you're, the younger generations today that were, born with a smartphone in your hand. But back in our day, there was just the phone, and it was hooked up to a, port in the wall. And you had sort of a holder or a holster that the phone would sit in, and then it would be sort of bound to that often by a sort of that fun sort of coiled cord that was almost kind of elastic. And you would pick that up and, put it up to your head and have the phone conversation, and you could only walk a few feet away from where it was attached. And do you have any memories of what that was like?
Yeah, I mean, because there was two styles. Well, I mean, the phones themselves, obviously you had the older rotary one, and we didn't even really have that. That was more of a grandparent situation. But as far as the location of the phone, you're talking either flat on the table or up on the wall. And in both cases, there were variations within that, I suppose, because it's a landline. But and I guess I'm not sure if I'm jumping ahead here, but like then they would have a landline, but like the phone itself is wireless. I don't know if it was the same technology. Did we ever have one of those?
Yeah, we weren't ever that fancy. That was sort of like I think almost like a transition into the dedicated wireless phone. Was where it was hooked up to the wall. You could take the wireless. There was normally like a stand or something it would almost dock into. And then you could pick it up and walk around and talk on it. But I have to assume with those there was some sort of max distance before you couldn't just wander.
Yeah, because I think that was before Bluetooth, so they probably I don't know, because I mean you're gonna have to call a contractor for the actual technical. We're not breaking down how 5G works, but I think just for the classic style. I mean, I can picture the one literally right. I got the notes in front of me right here. I mean the beige clamshell with that cord, the curl that kind of gives you some length, not enough. I think we never had, I'll see period pieces in other people's homes and stuff where they have these long cord phones that are in the hall, so you can just kind of go to all the different rooms. Ours was, I think, a little bit more modest than that, so you couldn't really get too far on it, but it was centralized in that way, and because it was stuck to the wall and because the phone was stuck to the receiver in turn and everything is very analog, it made being on the phone for any reason a little bit more of an event.
Exactly. Yeah, it wasn't exactly something casually that you could just sort of walk about and do passively. It was like you had to be in that particular location for that interval of time, and it wasn't exactly something to where you could, multitask and go do other things. I can't remember if ours, because you'd mentioned rotary, and I was realizing I don't think I've ever learned how to use a rotary phone. Like you said, I think our grandparents had one. I was trying to remember, did our phone have the buttons on the phone or on the sort of, the set that it would
I think they were on the phone, because our home growing up, there was two phones, one upstairs, one downstairs, one that was in our parents' room, and then the other one that was kind of in a central space that wore many hats over the years, but it was for a while something resembling a computer stand or something of that nature. And it was up on the wall. And I want to say it was on the phone itself, because you would open it up like a book, you take it off the receiver and then the numbers would be there.
Right.
But I think The one upstairs, at least at some point, did become actually one of those semi-wireless ones. I think it might even had like light-up buttons or something. And that was pretty sick. The one that was downstairs, yeah, it was. I mean, at a minimum, it definitely was the standard style, which is even still with us now, where you have a grid of keys and there are ones that correspond to letters. And I don't know that I ever, as a kid, like called any number that was like, oh, so and so, and then here's the word spelled out. Like, I always thought it was kind of cute, but I never. I mean, by the time I reached the age where I was calling people, I was doing it with a cell phone.
Yeah, I never understood how that worked either, because you'd see those commercials would be like, call 1-800-FIX-NOW or something,
Yeah.
and how you would type out those letters always baffled me as a child. I think it was like, certain numbers would have like one of 3 letters associated with it, and then you were supposed to know, like, okay, well, that letter corresponds to that particular number, and so on. But I don't think I ever messed with that. With those keys too, certain almost like notes, like tones that would be produced when you would push different numbers. So I can almost remember like little tunes that were associated with certain people's phone numbers that we would regularly call. Like you would hear like dun 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 dun, and that was like that particular series of numbers that would be associated with a person's phone. And
it's like playing a song in one of the Zelda games.
Yeah, and it was never like a pleasant melody. Like if I was designing that, I would have at least tried to make everything be in some sort of like generally same key to where it would.
It's like jazz.
It's
the beeps that you're not hearing.
Yes. But that was something actually, as we were talking just now, that I realized is like, I don't think any of the smartphones nowadays, when you're dialing phone numbers, however rarely people do that these days, I don't think any of them really, to my recollection, produce sounds. It's completely silent.
I know on iPhones there's an option to have the tones, and I don't know if they're the same.
Okay.
I don't know if it plays the hits, like if it's the same way across all phones. I guess that's that might be a whole other conversation, is were those tones like a mandatory thing, like how the internet sounds when it dials up, or does it depend on the manufacturer?
Yeah, did it mean something, or was it purely just for like a little musical ditty?
Yeah, iPhones, they do have some of those features, but they do tend to lack is that discreteness, that physical nature. And we talk about that a lot on the show, and we'll probably continue to do so. Digital versus analog, and these phones, obviously, it becomes phantasmal in the wires through the lines, but like on the end you have this phone that's much more a thing you can pick up and hold, and the buttons they have specific little things, and the tone, there's even kind of a clickety clack to it.
Yeah, I agree, and I definitely want to circle back around to that towards the end of our conversation as we're getting up to talking about smartphones, and then we can kind of sandwich both beginning and end and compare those two. But that is for sure a major difference, that back to these kind of landline phones, was that just like that physicality. And even which we'll get to in a second, but when you're like getting into sort of like the portable cellular phone, the buttons are becoming that much flatter, that much less tactile, even though they were still physical buttons. But like those buttons had like depth and size to them when you were dialing these numbers, in a way that as the devices got smaller, you just gradually started to phase out that tactility of interacting with it. So I guess, unless there's something else you can think of, I think that pretty much covers like what I remember about the landline phone, because we were pretty young, when we were really making use of that. But another big form of communication around that time, which you could say is definitely predating the 90s, is of course snail mail, and actually just sending letters. Imagine that,
Service. Yes.
The U.S. Postal, like writing things out by hand and sending them and communicating that way. And like I do, we actually in our family to continue that in certain ways to this day, sending out birthday cards or thank you cards or things like that, just little things here and there. But I have memories of doing that also as a kid, probably for the same occasions. But that was certainly more of a thing, I think, back then than it is now. I mean, I clearly, Hallmark is still booming, so it's not like they're going out of business anytime soon. But I know it's.
I mean, I think for me, I would maybe drill down into that, and maybe cards are still thriving. I would think like writing like substantive letters and things to people.
Right.
Or
that's a good distinction.
Or when you do write those letters or write those cards, cursive.
Well, cursive I do not miss.
Yes.
Cursive is
spoiler
such a
alert,
waste.
Bygone.
We can already say bygone to
Yes.
cursive. Maybe we'll do a
Preemptive
penmanship
strike.
subject.
But yeah, no, because I even as I say that, I must confess I don't often really I can't recall any specific times where I had written significantly large letters to people. I know there's times where I've received them, and that was nice. Older relatives, especially, who did have such immaculate penmanship, and were definitely of an era even before us where that was something that was coveted. I always keep those because it is nice, and it feels good to get something funny or heartfelt from somebody that you, especially if they're a creative person and they their letter or their card has some kind of flourish to it, some art that they've made or a print of something or something they've done with paper designs or those kinds of things. Last time I think I ever really had like a pen pal or something, though, was a friend that I exchanged maybe a couple of letters with when I went off to college, and even that was, we're kind of pushing near the end of our timeline here in the 2010s. Just for the heck of it, just even at the time, it kind of felt quaint. But I think it matters. I mean, if you have a person that you can do that with, that you can have that kind of correspondence with, it lasted that long and still continues for a good reason, because it's a really nice personal way to communicate.
Yeah, I agree. I think that in part because of the time and extra effort it takes to compose the message, I think that it does add more kind of meaningfulness to it. It takes time, so I think there's an element of, it's much slower correspondence, but I feel like a person is sort of putting more into each of those communications. And yeah, I think that there's like a real kind of heart to letters, and that's something that definitely started to be much less of a thing as the phone came along, and then as phones got more and more advanced, which we'll get into, all of that sort of became texting and things like that. And I don't think there's the same depth and heartfeltness that I feel receiving even a long text message.
Yeah.
I almost find that like sometimes a little bit stressful to receive like a huge text versus a letter that maybe was of equal length. It's a different feel to it, and like you said, there's almost elements of artistry and maybe the way in which the person writes it, or if they're doing little other flourishes and that sort of thing. So yeah, I just wanted to touch on that briefly.
Sure.
I know that's a little bit off topic from like technology, but it was a form of communication that I think was a little bit more of a thing when we were younger that I don't see people doing quite so much.
Yeah.
But certainly that. Another one, which is a little bit maybe of an odd example and is maybe more in sort of the toy realm, but like walkie-talkies.
Yeah.
We did have walkie-talkies as a kid. And I remember we had like some more kind of like traditional kind of, black with the little kind of antenna sticking up and the little kind of orangish screens that we could read the channels on. And we had those to do some walkie-talkie stuff with. We also had just like this absurd set that I had convinced our great aunt to get for us, which were based on the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movie. And they were just two like really big action figures of Spider-Man and Green Goblin. And their like abdomens had speakers and mics in them to where you could like hold the figure up to your face and like talk into their stomachs to communicate with the other person.
Yeah, God, I completely forgot about those. That was weird. That was weird. I think to your point about them being almost kind of toys, I think someone really was just like, let's just make it an action figure.
Yeah.
Like make it like a 1/16 scale action figure that's also a short range communications device.
Yeah. So and we grew up out in the country, so there was a little bit, I think, more of a justification to be kind of running around outside and playing around with, hey, I can talk to you over the walkie-talkie kind of thing. And I don't really know if, I don't want to keep jumping back and forth and doing the Bring It Back or Bygone on every single one of these, but like just briefly, like I don't really know if there's much of a place for walkie-talkies these days. I guess if you are out in like in the middle of nowhere in the forest or something, and it's like, hey, like I need like very local communication. I guess that's a place for it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I guess if it's strictly for kids playing around, I see the value in it. Certainly things about it that are simpler in good ways as far as technology goes. And I still, to this day, will see like kid walkie-talkie sets that have those toy-like kind of colorful appearances being based on stuff. I'll see those at the store, or I'll see those I'll just see them around. And I think the idea is they are substantially cheaper than a smartphone. And to your point about being in the outdoors, the way that the tech works, you don't have to have Wi-Fi or a cell signal. I mean, you can't get super far away from each other, but that kind of stuff is actually pretty good for getting people out and about, or if they're already outside, it's You got your channels to watch out for. I never really came across anything scandalous, but I would flip on those and be like, oh, there is somebody else out here who is like also using a walkie-talkie or some other device that interfaces with this, and it may be needlessly anxious, but there's the odds of somebody else getting onto the call are never zero.
That's true. Yeah, never know who's listening in on your conversations. But yeah, that is a good point. That especially if you're trying to find like an introductory form of like device communication for a kid that isn't just handing them a smartphone with all of the issues with that, then yeah, that's true. There's definitely a place for that as well for walkie-talkies. But I thought I would bring that up. And then the last thing that came to mind for me in the 90s of different communication technologies, which I guess would be sort of late 90s, but the advent of the internet really taking off and dialing up to the internet to use things like email, like early email. And I know that I definitely have strong memories of dial-up and just, how incredibly slow it was. You had to do like the, and all the unpleasant tones, speaking of tones, that would be produced each time you tried to connect. And of course the conflicts with the landline. Yes. Because it was a shared sort of, network. And I distinctly recall very like serious conversations with our parents to us about like, I'm expecting a call at this, window of time today, so you can't be using the internet. Like,
sounds a little strange now.
It sounds a little strange now, but like, totally. Like back then, like that was a big thing. It was like, you need to not be on the computer, which was, it was going to take a while, whatever you were trying to do. So it, like, you had to always budget that time. And if you wanted to do something, it was like, hey, like people won't be able to reach us while you're doing this. So like, the 30 minutes you're waiting to load like, a web page or whatever it was that you're trying to load. I was about to say YouTube, but like back then there wasn't even YouTube. No tube. But like no tube. But whatever it was you were trying to load, it was like, hey, like you can't be taking too long with this because like I'm expecting a phone call. And conversely, somebody else is doing something important, and it's like, well, I can't call my friend or my relative or whatever because mom or dad's got to check something on the internet. And it was so like just it's making me laugh just like thinking about the fact that was ever a problem that we faced. But like, yeah, that was a legitimate thing growing up.
And we were doubly in a pickle for a while because we were so far out in the sticks that even our dial-up was pretty slow for its time and continued to be so because that carried over into broadband or whatever was the big thing. I don't know if we ever had that. Obviously I came back one day and there was Wi-Fi, but it was like that was a big. There were other reasons, but moving into that era when online gaming, video games started becoming a thing, and you want to talk about communication for better or worse, people playing multiplayer games, playing Halo, whatever. I never did that because we just didn't have a tech for it, and it was just not an option if you didn't have, even by 2000 standards, fast-ish internet to be playing online games with people or even online chatting and stuff. Like I was on message boards and some things, but it's so kind of interesting in the march of time when people sort of are doing more of that reflection on the 2000s and romanticizing and thinking about that era. One of the big things is like, ooh, people doing like AIM or whatever. I never had that. I never did those kinds of chat rooms or those kinds of whatever. I don't think it was necessarily like any kind of safety concern for my parents. It was just by the time I started being able to use that tech and to care to use it, things were already coming up like MySpace, and I didn't use that either, but like social media as we now know it, like I kind of just missed that period with the technology that we had available to us. The closest again that I came was a couple of online message boards creeping towards the late 2000s, but in the early 2000s, it was like I got a phone, got to wait in line to get on the computer. It's a struggle.
Yeah, no, I obviously grew up in the same household, so I had the same experiences. I wasn't doing any sort of online gaming. I did, briefly play around into the early 2000s with, certain message boards and forums and things like that, mainly centered around, video games and things of that nature, but didn't really get to engage with that, like, dawn of the online community up until it had already become social media. And it's funny to talk with like friends I have now who did grow up in households that had, for that time, high-speed internet, and talking about, they're talking about like, oh, I played Neopets or, early World of Warcraft, or RuneScape, or, was MapleStory.
MapleStory, you just read my mind, yes.
And I have like it's not necessarily community, but I have like memories of early 2000s, like experiencing community through certain online things like early YouTube or like Homestar Runner. That was a big one.
Yes.
We could do a whole other discussion on, I guess, like,
Flash cartoons.
Flash cartoons. And that's probably, I don't want to get too far down that rabbit hole in this video, but that was
back will be the name of the episode.
Yes. So that stuff, definitely was out there. And it was a way to connect with people in the real world over things we were seeing, online in our respective places. But I didn't really find real online community until the era of social media. But early 2000s, there were some of those forums and whatnot. In terms of the next stage for communication devices, that would have been, I think, around the time that our parents had gotten maybe their first cellular phone.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what the very first one they had. Was it a flip phone or was it a brick?
There might have been a brick in there. I definitely remember a flip phone or two. I don't know if it was a Razor, that specific brand, but it was... there was one that I think was a little chunkier, and then maybe one that later but did have that sleeker kind of post-Matrix look to it.
Yeah, and it had the little... You could kind of twist and extend the antenna for it.
Yes.
And... it took us a little bit longer. Well, I don't think I had my own phone till like high school, and even then it was a flip phone. But I do remember in the early 2000s sometimes using, their flip phone. And boy, I've said this a couple times to people offline, but I really miss flip phones. There's so many great things about flip phones. Obviously you had the tactile buttons and that sort of thing, but just like the ability to like slap it shut to like end phone calls. It's very satisfying. Like, clack, when you were done with it. It added like an extra layer of protection because the screen, was inside of the sort of the clamshell, so it felt like it was more durable, and it often was more durable. And it was, still of a good portable size. I would say the ones we had were smaller than modern smartphones by far. And I don't know, there was a lot that I appreciate and miss about having a flip phone and having people in the family with flip phones.
No, absolutely. And there were different styles of them. I mean, there still are of smartphones, but I feel like there's less variety because at the end of the day, it's still just got to be a screen, a grid. And these other ones that have like more contours to them, or they'd have a different shape, a very tiny screen on the front. That would have like the time or something else on it.
Right. Yeah, that's true. They did have the little screen in the front that could give you some information as well. And then there was like that transition, because you had like your Blackberries and stuff where it was, a bigger screen. There wasn't the clamshells, flip phone design, but there would often be like an actual keyboard of like all of these different buttons. And I remember like the cool kids getting into like middle school and high school would have the ones where you'd kind of like push and it would like pop up.
Yeah, I never had one of those, but I always thought they looked kind of neat. Yeah.
Yeah, the full keyboard would become exposed and the screen would kind of shift upwards. Yep. And there was like other crazier kind of matrixy ones where it would like spin and rotate to expose the keyboard or another screen.
That's like the car version of guillotine doors or whatever on a car.
Like a DeLorean.
It's the phone version of car guillotine doors. Yeah.
But like there was just so many insane and experimental designs out there. It was like this wild west of creating portable, cellular phones, and I kind of miss that. There's, we'll get to it a little bit more in a bit, but like smartphones, like you said, Trevor, are like all almost identical. Like you could honestly, if I didn't see the logo, you could honestly hold any of them up to me side by side, and I would be like, I can't tell the difference between these, and it's just the screen. There's no tactility whatsoever. It's very exposed. But anyway, we'll get to that in a bit. But like, I know there's certain reasons why things have changed that way, but boy, I really do think that we had something there with the way that those were designed. So that was sort of the next step in terms of phones. We talked about evolutions in internet with getting into email. Oh, on the subject of email, Yahoo, which I don't know. Yahoo. I don't think anybody's using Yahoo anymore, probably because of that big like data breach or whatever happened.
Only the oldest people alive.
Actually, be careful what you say there, because I think that our parents may have Yahoo email addresses they still use.
Yeah. Well, I think somebody the other day at a party was like, they were talking, and they said something that made me realize they had apparently been trying to get a hold of me at my old Yahoo email address for who knows how long, and I was like, oh, I haven't used that in like 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think mine is still technically active.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I even have my login information anymore, but it's probably still out there somewhere. I think I had, I don't remember the full email, but I remember it was like a monumental moment to get an email. It felt so like grown up at the time. Like, I have my own electronic email address that people can contact me.
Yeah,
through.
it's kind of a very low stakes sort of California gold rush where it's like, I mean, obviously we had to start adding numbers and things to the end of our names because some lucky folks out there were the ones to get like just so and so word or so and so name, and they must be squatting on those things like a dragon's pile of gold.
Yeah, it's like a domain name or something now. But I think mine, I don't remember the full email, but I think in part it was like I spliced together like two of my favorite video game characters. So it was like Luigi from Mario Brothers and then Gino from Super Mario RPG. And so I think it was like Luigino something at yahoo.com. And
yeah, I kind of just same situation. You mash up your name, you mash up something you're interested in, and fortunately the ones that I picked age well. Some people out there probably have weird, incomprehensible or tacky ones that don't, but I've never really had
420 blazes.
Yeah, I never reached a point where I was like, I probably should change my email address. Like it's
Well, I did.
It's functional. Yeah, eventually.
I used that email address way longer than I should have, and I think it probably like wasn't until college or something where I was like, okay, like I need to pick something that like people will be less confused by, if nothing else.
Yeah.
So I ended up using one that was just a version of my name instead, which is more boring, but like and then I ended up on Gmail was my next platform.
Yep.
What else? What are any other things before we move on to the 2010s?
Well, I mean, this is kind of ancillary to communication itself, but ringtones.
Oh, yeah. No, that was definitely a big thing.
There was a couple of years where those burned bright because for a while they weren't a thing, and then you would have novelty, like just the sound would be something distinct, and then it became songs and clips. And I definitely remember a couple of years where there were like ads for ringtones and like full page ads like Electronic Gaming Monthly or for like wallpapers or ringtones, like text so and so number to get, I don't know, Peter Griffin saying something. And then now obviously shut up, no one cares, turn that thing off, put it on vibrate. Like it was just that right period of time where it was a new enough thing that everyone wanted to kind of show their flair. And then it became very annoying. And now I'm at the point where when somebody is significantly older than me, which is no fault of their own, but I'm like, when the phone starts like loudly going off, I'm like, oh, okay.
You're showing your age.
Yes. Well, I say that, and again, the timing of when I got my own, we would talk about when we get cell phones. I don't remember my flip phone. I think I probably did get at the end of high school or the beginning of college. I don't remember what my ringtone really was. I think it was just one of those built-in things. I know our dad had, I want to say Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses.
For a very long time.
Which is a pretty sick riff, so I thought that was a good choice. I think at some point he switched over to the Godfather theme, which is, I mean, you got to hand it to him. But no, I don't even, I mean, I have like special tones that I use maybe when a certain person calls. That's our modern version of that. But I think back in the day, it was just like, every time that your phone rang, because there was texting, but there wasn't a lot of it. Phone rang, you just start randomly hearing a song or a clip or something, and maybe there was a brief window of time where that was kind of a lively world, but I think I eventually reached the point where I'm like, no, I don't need to hear that every single time someone's phone goes off.
Well, I'm proud to say I do still have a ringtone, and I do still enjoy picking a custom ringtone. The great thing nowadays is that you can just find whatever MP3 you want or WAV or whatever file format, and you can just, put that as your custom ringtone. Now, from my experience, it's much easier to do with Android devices than iPhone. I don't know if that's like Apple wanting you to pay for stuff on Apple Music or what that is, but with my Android devices, I've been able to pick whatever I want.
That's good.
And I really enjoy that. Maybe it annoys people when I get phone calls and they hear my ringtone go off. I try not to have it obviously at like max, annoying volume. but it's just another form of customization, another way of expressing myself. It's like a fun little thing. I think it's fun anyway when it goes off and it's kind of a fun little song or something. And obviously I don't pick anything obnoxious. I'm not, blasting like drill rap or something when somebody
dubstep
calls
remix
me.
of Sweet Caroline.
So I'm not doing that, but I like ringtones. And back then, I don't think when we were younger we ever paid money, because obviously you had to go into the store and buy whatever compressed little ringtone you wanted.
Yeah.
I never did that, but I would try to pick whatever one that I liked the sound of.
Well, it's interesting, just again, on a broader level, the kind of technology that we use to communicate determines how we communicate, and vice versa. And that's why I think around that same time you start to see the birth of what we called emoticons then, and then became emojis. Obviously, that started on desktop computers and typing of keyboard, but it's like making a little image that these things had cameras, but they were pretty poor quality, and it was difficult to really do that. You're not sending memes, as we would now call them, so the image thing was kind of more of at a premium, and so you'd have your classics, your XD, your sideways mouth of the D of a circle. I mean, the conundrum of whether or not to put a nose on the face. I think that's psychopathic behavior.
You don't ever put a nose on a smiley face.
But that same thing too. I mean, even on the ringtone side of things, there was like a whole subgenre that people called ringtone rap for a while, because they were songs that were being made. Like, it's hard to describe it. When you hear it, like, kind of, they sound like a ringtone. Like this chirrupy. The beat was like this. I'm trying to think if there. This Is Why I'm Hot by Mims, I think, is often thrown into that category. Just are kind of like a precursor to when you have like TikTok stuff now, where everybody's very short songs, because the way they are being shared prizes brevity, and I think that ringtones, phones having ringtones, in turn influenced the kind of music that was made so that it would become a ringtone.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, that definitely, I think it's sort of like, the ringtones influencing music and music influencing ringtones sort of reciprocally. And yeah, to your point of emoticons and, those being an internet thing, but then starting to show up over, messaging on phones, I think that bridges us perfectly into sort of what I was going to talk about for us was the, early 2010s, and I think other people had gotten into the game a little bit sooner, but like our parents, like, let us start to have phones around that time, and I think we both started with flip phones.
Yep.
And so I was not big on texting. I didn't want to do it. I would either make phone calls, or I would just try to find people in person, or contact them over the internet. I did not like texting. I thought it was kind of cumbersome. We also, at that time, were on phone plans where it cost a lot of money. Like, it was like almost like a per text charge.
Yep.
So there were a lot of incentives not to do it, but I was still aware of it, and that was around the time when you started to see an uptick in, like you said, the use of sort of proto emojis, some of the things you mentioned about like the sideways smiley, or those kinds of little symbols, but then also abbreviations. And using that keyboard, which back then was the T9, and again, for you youngins out there, the T9 keyboard was the 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 and then 0 at the very bottom, and you would have to repeatedly press numbers to cycle through different letters. So like 1 would be like ABC, 2 would be DEF, so on. And so if you wanted to type like hello, you would be like you'd be going around pressing all these numbers repeatedly to try to spell out the letters that you wanted. And obviously very slow and cumbersome. Some people got insanely fast at it. You would just watch their thumbs fly, in the way people do now with our touch screens. But some people were incredibly quick typing with the T9 keyboard. And that also gave rise to a lot of abbreviations. And, your LOL, your OMG, WTF, Raffle, IDK, BFF, like all of these abbreviations, I feel like really were starting to take off with texting around that time. Yeah.
I mean, it's another example of this thread that runs through all of these things. Of the first emoticons and the first abbreviations of that manner were definitely something that showed up like in AOL chat rooms and things like that online. And then everybody likes to be very quick with the way that they type, and more so when you're having to play a video game puzzle basically to spell out a sentence. So it was only natural, I think, that it sort of moved on to there. For me, as far as the cost goes, and as far as the labor of it, I did enjoy texting because I was really been interested in expressing myself through the written word, and being able to do that more efficiently was something that I enjoyed, but it was definitely still a bit of a hassle. And if I thought I had something really funny or important or insightful to say, but I would put in the minutes with my thumb. But there was a period of time where I was trying to get around that by just writing something on paper and taking a picture of it and sending it. And a friend of mine eventually had to be like, look, it's way too expensive for you to keep sending me these pictures. You got to stop.
Well, yeah, because back then, like you said, not only were the cameras bad, but people, like, it also cost money to send pictures.
Yeah.
Like nowadays, you get a phone plan and you just communicate. You send, you can obviously have caps on data or whatever, but like a lot of people just have unlimited data or whatever, and they're just texting and sending pictures, and especially over Wi-Fi now, it's not even a problem. But back then, it was like commodified on a per message basis.
Yeah,
and you had to think through those things.
Yeah, and I mean, to go back through the text, you're not flipping with your thumb or your finger on the screen. It's like going through lore entries in a game where you just got to scroll over each screen is like one text or one section of a text, and made it really a pain to review conversations.
Yeah, you had to like slowly use like the directional arrows to and like kind of go up and down between messages. Oh, yeah. I don't miss that. That was not great. And I also would have friends that would try to text me because they were more into it, and I would have to call them on the phone and say like, hey, please, like, just call me if you need to talk, because I can't be charged, this much per text to communicate with you. And, it felt kind of bad, but that was a thing. There were some other devices around the time that offered, as we're now starting to get more into like certain things being Wi-Fi enabled. Obviously these flip phones were not Wi-Fi enabled, internet really. But there was like, I remember having an iPod Touch, and that was like a big thing because I could actually open up my email and go to websites, albeit very clumsily on the little iPod Touch, screen. But that did give me, I think, my actual first portable device that had, internet access.
Yep.
And so that was a big thing.
Yep.
Now, the other thing I'll bring up, because technically I think it did have internet access, and it also had local wireless communication, but was the Nintendo DS.
Yeah, sure.
For us at least. So the DS had, a really bad internet browser.
Yeah.
And it had the PictoChat.
PictoChat, yes.
And PictoChat was a ton of fun. I remember messaging with other friends over that and doing little games with drawing images and sending things of varying immaturity back and forth.
Well, yeah, I mean that's a great way to send pictures of text without having to cost you anything but your sanity. So it's it was a fun, again, kind of, we look back on it now and it does feel so intermediary, but I definitely remember having a good time with that. With friends at school, or sleepovers, or just something to just amuse yourself with, just drawing on the screen, because that's the thing too, is, I mean, the stylus was a big part of that, because those earlier, and again, we never had, we did not talk about these for a reason, because we just never had them, but like Palm Pilots and touchpads, and like those are a more like moneyed thing, I think, or they weren't something I don't think that the average person had. And for a little while there in the early 2000s, Nintendo just came over the whole industry like a tidal wave with a lot of these technological developments and changes, and the motion controls and the touch controls, and now we have those in phones. They have gyrometers, and they have that was all kind of happening around the same time, and the look of all this Apple stuff, the sleekness, the fruitier arrow vibes that we've talked about before, all of this is happening together at the same time. So you get some really interesting aesthetic touches, like the look of your iPod Classic or your iPod Nano or whatever, and even some of the flip phones were starting to move in that direction with the wallpapers and the ways that the music would sound. But the DS, so it was quite a different beast, and I mean the look of it and just the whole double screen thing that they were doing and the kinds of communication that allowed for. I know around the same time, I never had a PSP or anything. I that had internet as well. I don't know if it had any chatting communications. I feels like something that they would have, but I don't really know. I want to just pay respects at the grave of the N-Gage, because we had again that time where it's like, what are phones going to be? Are we going to play games on phones? Are we going to do other things with them? And so they made this thing. I'll put up a picture of it, but yeah, no, that didn't go anywhere. Now we have insane games on phones, so I don't think that needs to really be. That can be an unmarked grave as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, real quick, I do remember Snake being a big deal.
Oh, Snake, yes.
As a phone game. I think that's a classic. Maybe there were other ones that I'm blanking on. Maybe like Breakout, that might have been one.
Breakout, no. Well, on the iPod at least, there definitely were some games on the iPod, and I remember because they had the wheel that you would scroll,
Yes.
like that was a really efficient way to kind of emulate like a trackpad or something in an arcade. So I actually remember, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I remember having a pretty good couple of games of Breakout on my old iPod.
Yeah, that's right. Oh gosh. And then I guess that kind of brings us to, I guess we might as well touch on it real quick. I think this has probably come up in prior stuff too, and it won't be the last time I'm sure here, but like social media. That was the big, in combination with internet enabled cellular devices, that would come to be known as smartphones. You had that combination of people can now be on the internet wherever they are for the most part, in addition to being accessible by texting and by phone calls. And then you had the birth of something like MySpace, things like that, and then of course Facebook itself. We don't need to go super deep into it, but we obviously both hopped on Facebook eventually, and that started that form of communication that now is just, it permeates everything. I almost feel like now people are using their phones as a way to be on social media, maybe even, I would maybe say equally to texting, but that is like the form I feel like of communication now is like doing things through social media and through texting. Certain things have been flipped on their head now, to where the smartphone it's almost, I feel like it's like maybe not frowned upon, but like the idea now of making phone calls, I think gives people a lot of anxiety, especially receiving phone calls, and especially phone calls from numbers that you maybe don't recognize.
Yeah, well, that could be, I'd say it's another conversation, but it's kind of not, because we're talking about communications. Phones, I mean, that word just means something different now, because actually calling someone or receiving a call is suspect, because the powers that be have just decided that they don't really care about dealing with spammers and dealing with grifters and all this other stuff. And so whenever you get a call from someone you don't know, it probably is someone trying to scam you or just bothering you or something. And those people have always existed, obviously, crank calls. It's even, I mean, at least we have caller ID. I mean, you might not recognize the number, but you can figure out what the number is. That's a start. So I definitely don't want to put on rose-tinted glasses there, but I think, part of the reason is people have moved over more to text communication or to indirect social media communication, that a one-on-one, just a stranger calling you, I can see that it would bug me. I don't know if there's ever really been a point in my life where I've been comfortable on the phone, and I think the fact that it all is so there's no direct talk, and there is direct talk, but like you're not seeing the person or knowing really anything about them besides a number, unless you do a video call or something, and maybe even then, I share that anxiety. Yeah, although I will say, like, even if it's someone I know, if it's like a family member or something, a lot of times my brain jumps to like, oh, is there like an emergency? Like, why are they calling? Because if you say only call when it's an emergency, or like everything else is casual, then there are other. The etiquette of it. This is maybe kind of a different rabbit hole, but like I think we all agree there's certain things that you don't say over text or writing versus in person versus on the phone. Like these are all kind of unspoken things. So when one of those sort of unspoken things is like, oh, you only really call somebody when it's urgent, if you're not like on a street corner like, yo, where'd you park? And just randomly you get a call like early in the night or in the morning or whatever, it's like, oh God, what is it? What do the tests come back with?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. I feel like the vibes around making and receiving phone calls are different than they used to be, even if it's more of like a joke. Maybe it's not as much as people play it up to be, but it does feel different to me, and I guess certainly the way, like, and maybe me as a person, I need to be more open to making phone calls more often. But I feel like everyone now has much more defaulted to texting. But you mentioned video calls, and that is something that I find interesting, which is that people seem to have this hesitancy about the idea of getting and making phone calls, but then so many people use FaceTime. Like, I have an Android device, so FaceTime isn't a thing for me. I have certain ways of still doing video calls through other applications, but I don't have FaceTime. And FaceTime is huge. Like, you'll see people walking around in public, on FaceTime calls, like holding it, almost obscuring their ability to see what's in front of them so they can have a FaceTime call. And I don't know. I guess it's a personal preference thing, but like I have not really adopted that. Especially in public.
I haven't either. There's been times where I've done it, but only like very rarely with close acquaintances like you or maybe another relative or something. There's just not that many people where I want to talk to them that much, that badly, and also feel the need to in a sense almost kind of monopolize their space, because like if you have a headset or your speaker, you can put the phone down. But and I guess you can set up like the moving around thing. Like unless both parties are doing that, one of those people is sort of inconveniencing the other. Because even if a cell phone is portable, it's still like, well, if you're holding it and you have to like look at the person and you're not just setting it on a shelf or something while you're walking around, then it kind of monopolizes the other person's space.
Yeah, and I feel like there's more, and again, maybe this is just me, but I feel like there's a little bit more needing to kind of be on, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like you said, like you can't really be multitasking unless you really don't care whether the person sees you engaged or not. You obviously are now visible, so you can't be, walking around in your underwear in your house, or like, you have to be, in theory, at least a little bit presentable, because somebody can now see you and what you're doing. And you could say there's certain positives, like maybe it's easier to see certain like bodily or nonverbal communications, and maybe that enhances the ability to communicate. But at the same time, it feels like there's a little bit more pressure, I think, than if it's a text or even a phone call. So I don't know. Maybe it's something that I should experiment with more. I know a lot of people do a ton of FaceTiming and video calls nowadays. For whatever reason, both with phone calls and video kind of FaceTime calls, I don't generally like people being super loud about them, if that makes sense. Like a person can talk to another person at the same volume and it's fine, but if it's like them on a phone call or a FaceTime call, for some reason that like irks me more.
Yeah, well, I mean, you want to be considerate. It's the same thing as playing a boombox or your phone or something really loud in public. It's just being considerate of your surroundings, and also maybe just understanding how this device works. So if you think it's too quiet, or maybe the other person just needs to turn their volume up.
Yeah.
Loud phone calls in public to people. I mean, I think a lot of times just having the phone, using it in public is kind of its own sort of flex. Like your influencers running around, filming themselves, doing everything. Like it's this centering of the self. And when you're on a phone call, it is sort of about you, because the call is coming through when you're talking on the phone. But especially now when everything is more text oriented, when you do have a call, it does kind of stand out more in that way. And I think it's very rare, but I'll really end up taking a call in public just because I happen to, on the rare occasion where I'm taking or making a call, I kind of want to be somewhere where people aren't overhearing what I'm saying, because I don't want to bother them, but I also don't want them to necessarily hear what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I agree. That's something else we didn't really touch on, which is like accessories to phones and communication devices, because there was a whole evolution from like the early days of like the, wired headset with the microphone sort of call center look. And then you had, the fancy Bluetooth earpiece that went in, where you either looked like a really like Wall Street stock market hotshot, or you kind of looked a little bit like a goofball having that in your ear all the time. And then now we're up to, which Apple has been brilliant with the branding on this, but we're up to now with the AirPods. To where I see people,
viewers, I've got some right here. So
there you go, exactly. And people use it not only as something that's almost perpetually in their ears, but it's almost like a statement or a fashion accessory to have like the AirPods or the AirPods Pro, and to be using those all the time.
Well, I will say, but the flip phone, you can do this.
Yes,
I find that very satisfying.
So we're still getting a little bit of a clamshell kind of effect with that snap action. So yeah, those devices and headsets have also, evolved over time and play a big role in how we communicate and how we show others the way that we communicate. And then, with the cameras, and especially the concept of the front-facing camera, which is relatively new, because flip phones and those earlier phones didn't have front-facing cameras. There is, I think, a lot more of a sense of these devices being, reflected back on ourselves, and that's kind of what people joke about with that show Black Mirror is, because you be on that phone, like, everything now is the fault of the Black Mirror, and these devices that reflect upon our own, most selfish and bad qualities or whatever. And I don't want to be one of those people that's like, oh, smartphones are terrible and you should throw yours in the garbage or something. Like, there are very positive things about how we can stay so connected nowadays. But I think that, when you look over time, the ways in which technology has accelerated, and I think in some ways almost made it too fast, too abbreviated, not just in terms of like language being condensed down to, LOL and that sort of thing. But like, I think that communication, the expression talk is cheap.
Yeah.
Talk is cheaper than ever.
Yes.
Communication is cheaper than ever. It is less valued than it has ever been, I think, in a lot of respects. And people are kind of quick to go off the cuff and post something or text something or communicate something before they're kind of like thinking through it. Or able to communicate in a more accountable way, for one, but in a more well-rounded way that has intonation and body language and all of these other things that for 99.9% of human history of communication, all of these things that I think we're kind of losing in exchange for these conveniences.
Yeah, no, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, I think well, but that's good. That's a really good kind of tent to put on top of this, is like, what is the through line here? What are the benefits of being able to communicate with more people more quickly? And my attitude, I mean, I have a couple perspectives. One is technology, communications technology, any kind of technology. It's about what you do with it. It's about how you use it. It's not about what it does. It's about how it's used. I mean, I like to say that the oldest technology is fire, and you can warm yourself with a fire, you can burn your house down. And I think that I don't ever want to be, and I hope that's one thing that I can try to bring to these conversations, is I don't want to only be treasuring the past or conversely always looking for this future that is going to be perfect and is going to fix everything. It's not just the speed of the communication, it is that lack of barrier between thought and action, or between thought and speech. And when you had to like get a publisher or get out a pen and a piece of paper or a typewriter and take some notes, and there was like some barriers between your brain and the world, those barriers have kind of broken down. And there are cases where that's really good and great. And if a person needs help or has a cause or something just, how wonderful it is, what a miracle it is to have this technology that kings could only dream of to speak to so many so quickly. But if it's just people saying really base and shameful and fearful things, it's like Oscar Wilde said, man is least himself when he shows his face. If you give him a mask, he will show you who he truly is. And I don't think technology really has changed people. I think it's just kind of shown us, for better or worse, who they already were. And now there's nothing stopping them from just immediately spouting off. But it's all just kind of out there, and that's why I think it's really important to value what this technology can do for us. I think there are a lot of great things about video calls and about modern apps and Discord and things that are like half chat room, half social media, where you have these enclaves and these communities that can meet and talk about like-minded things. But it's like, I know this sounds kind of cliche, but it's like we have the quantity of speech has increased, but not necessarily the quality.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely agree with what you said about like not saying that like everything. That's kind of the point of this podcast, of this show, is that we're not trying to say that everything in the past was better and everything in the present is worse. And that's why we have our little segment at the end of Bring It Back or Bygone. It's like, we're trying to evaluate these things and not just look at them through rose-tinted glasses and say everything's horrible now, because there's a lot of great things that have developed over time. But I do agree with your point also on it's all in how it's used. I do think that there are certain sort of negative rights that were afforded to us with the earlier devices that we don't really have now, that maybe people don't realize. For one, the right to be forgotten, to have things that you said be forgotten, or at least not written down and chiseled into stone. Because nowadays anything that you posted online, any text that you sent somebody, is saved in an archive and is accessible for effectively eternity, unless somebody decides to go in and manually somehow try to remove it. And even then there's like backups of these, these sites and these chat logs and so on. So there's a sense now of permanence and maybe, for those of us who are concerned about impressions, that stuff is going to stay out there. And maybe people have changed down to where they're just like, I don't care what I say anymore, I'm just going to say it. But there's an element of that we used to have. And then also the ability to like disconnect.
Yes.
And the ability to not be able to be communicated with or reached. And there are certain ways nowadays that you can technically do that. You know, you can turn your phone off or choose not to participate in social media platforms like I've chosen to do, or things like that, and be really, you know, try to be disciplined with not over engaging in these methods of communication. But back in the day, it was, you know, like the landline phone that we talked about, you know, that was it. You weren't going to call somebody and reach them any other time of day unless they were nearby that phone. And even then it was, you know, certain times of the day they were accessible, and there were social norms about, like, you know, you really shouldn't call around dinner time. Like that was a thing, you know, if we got a call during dinner time, you could see our parents being like kind of miffed, like this had better be important. Because if it was somebody calling that it wasn't sort of an urgent matter, it was like, hey, you're not supposed to do that with this system that we have. And nowadays, you know, for better or worse, and people can differ on how much they choose to, you know, answer that call or text or whatever, but especially, you know, professionally nowadays, certainly, you're often expected to be always reachable by email, by phone, by text. You know, there's kind of this like, oh, you know, they haven't responded in the last hour sometimes, where it's, you know, there can be moments of anxiety that somebody hasn't instantly engaged with, you know, you reaching out, or conversely that someone else has been made upset because you didn't immediately respond to them. And it creates, I think, somewhat of an obligation that we didn't used to have, or perceived obligation at times, that we just have to always be plugged in and always connected. And with the social media side of things, I will say, you know, briefly, that I've definitely felt on the outside of a lot of things by choosing not to be on social media, and people talking about, you know, whether it's a trend or using something like, you know, Facebook Marketplace to sell stuff, or, you know, community events. Like people will talk about like, oh, this amazing thing happened. Oh, it was on Instagram. You didn't see it. And it's like, well, I don't use Instagram. And so I don't have access to what are now kind of the modern sort of community board, the bulletin, for where things are posted and shared. So, you know, there are certain things that you can almost feel like you need to be a part of to be truly engaged in a lot of stuff. But that's still a personal choice for everybody. And I found other ways to create, you know, community and to communicate with folks. But those are just some things I wanted to flag. But
sure.
Taken in totality, and because, you know, we are coming up on time here, let's go then to our final segment of Bring It Back or Bygone, and talk about a little bit, sort of closing thoughts on the ways in which we used to communicate, the technologies we used to use back in the day versus now, assuming that you could replace modern communications with those older ones. Would you? Yes or no? And if not, like what are sort of the net positives over the ways in which we communicate now?
Sure. Well, I kind of want to be, I don't know if positive is the right word, but maybe sort of ambitious and say bring it all back. Like I want options. I want to be able to go to the store and get a flip phone, get a landline with a cord, get a smartphone, and I'm sure technically you can do that. But I just feel like everything is so culturally fixated on this one kind of device. And again, to your point about expectations, like everyone expects or assumes, for better or worse, that you have this thing that can do this thing at this time of day in these places. And it really just pigeonholes ironically makes it harder to communicate, because there's these expectations that you use these certain things, and not even in the sense of etiquette like we talked about, just like, oh, well, I guess I better have this thing around because I don't know when someone's going to try to get a hold of me or whatever, and there's going to be a text or an email or something, or we get so anxious when we're not around Wi-Fi, or when our signal runs out or something, and it just starts feeling like this baby's, you know, teddy bear or something that I have to carry around everywhere because you can't function without it. I don't think that's great. I think it's nice to have the ability to learn things and look things up and contact someone if you're lost or sick or just need somewhere to find food. I mean, it's great. That's really great to have that technology. By consolidating so much into this one device, it really has created a lot of complications, ironically, by trying to simplify everything. And so I think, and there are developers, I see people doing things to try to bring some of those styles, merge those styles. They've got these modern flip smartphones. I've flirted with the idea of getting one of those. I think it's a good idea in concept. I don't know about the execution. There are some people out there that are kind of bringing back styles of, you know, quote unquote dumb phones. Razer might have even had kind of a renaissance recently, especially because we are now coming up on Y2K. nostalgia. I fully expect that if it doesn't already exist within the next year or two, we're going to start seeing just a lot of straight up like smart flip phones. And I'm all for it because I like the look and feel of it. It's a little bit more compact and sleek, and the screen is not one giant bullseye for the nearest crack of the sidewalk to take aim at. I think that every single one of these phases of time of communications, from letters to the internet to chat rooms to dumb phones to smartphones, they all have something unique and special about them. They all have something that can teach the next one. And I don't, it might be a little bit outside the ambit of this show for us to talk about maybe the future of communication, but I feel like I can only imagine that it's going to do the same thing, which is take a little of this and that and simplify it and streamline it, but also give people like us questions to ask again in the next 10-15 years.
Yeah, well said. I wholeheartedly agree. I would like to bring back not only the device options like you mentioned, but also, like you said, the ability to not be expected to be constantly accessible, to have a healthy barrier as like a societal expectation that like I won't always be right by my phone, and there will be times of the day, and maybe that is something that we just have to assert ourselves and not expect of society, but to just communicate firmly but assertively for ourselves that like letting people know, and it's a little harder for things like a profession where you have an employer or somebody who sort of sets those expectations for you, but I think bringing that back is healthy. I think having I'm all for physicality and interactivity and having tactility to devices. I love the design of things like the flip phone and whatnot, and would love to see that come back. I also have researched things like the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip and some of these other flip phones that are married with smartphones, and I haven't been swayed just yet. There's issues with the hinging mechanisms and sort of bubbling on the screen because they're still
that's
trying
been my
to keep
concern.
it.
Yes, yeah.
I would almost rather have it be. Well, it's tough because I get what they're trying to do is preserve the lower half as a touchscreen, but like if you could do like a Game Boy Advance SP style, where it's like a bigger screen, but you still have some tactile buttons, tactile buttons.
Works for me, yeah.
Anyway, maybe that's already out there and I just don't know about it. I think that there's a lot of creature comforts I've come to like now, like you said, having internet access, having the ability to look things up, having certainly GPS. I rely heavily on navigation using my smartphone, and that's been one of the things I've been least able to find a replacement for when I've flirted with the idea of just getting a dumb phone and just dropping the whole thing. Having little things too, like a camera that's decent if I come across things I want to take pictures or video of, that's great. A lot of these things can be pieced together through other devices, and you can carry kind of more stuff on you that equates to one smartphone, but you have to kind of think through these things, and I'd like to kind of keep the good and maybe cut out some of the bad in the way these devices are used. And then speaking about, other aspects of communication like social media and whatnot, I think those things have positives and their roles, but we just have to be very conscientious and responsible about how we use them. And I think to have it all try to come back to, as much as possible, which I guess we haven't really actually brought up in this conversation, oddly enough, but talking in real life.
Yes.
Doing things in real life.
Communicating on this
life.
podcast, on this show right now.
Yes, we are. Yes. And actually this is another form of communication, over the internet with our computers, but the importance of like letting communication be in service of real relationships. And I think that's important with whatever technology that we're using to communicate, whether it was in the 90s or, early 2000s or up to present day. It's great to communicate, but never forget the importance and the irreplaceability of telling somebody, let's get together. Let's do this thing on this date. Telling somebody, hey, it was great seeing you. When can we get together again? Like, don't ever forget that. I think it's
being
easy.
Being intentional with your relationships and correspondence, because I think social media, the technology itself is great. It is to aggregate news, to aggregate community. What a delight. But then if everything that you say is like to a crowd, if you're a business or a self-promoter, that's fine. It's encouraged even. But then if you talk about your life or what you have for breakfast or like legitimately difficult personal and political things that you're going through, I think that's where a lot of the the angst comes from on these platforms is it's not intentional. It's like, whoever looks at this, please look at this. Tens of thousands of hundreds of you, whatever. It's not purposeful.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess another way to look at it too is like to not engage too much with communication with people that are sort of anonymous or sort of empowered to maybe not be as accountable to you because they're not in your community or they're not somebody that you know, and taking whatever those people have to say with kind of a grain of salt. Again, unless there's like a particular reason because you're trying to recruit, viewers for a channel or things like that. There's certain times where you do have to engage with people that you'll never see in real life, but like, don't forget the value of interacting with people who you can actually interact with IRL, because otherwise I think sometimes we lose a little bit of that perspective and that humanity when we aren't thinking to ourselves like, oh yeah, I'll see so-and-so the next day, and that affects how I talk to them.
With very intentional purpose, smash that like button.
Smash that like button. Communicate to us that you're enjoying this. Well, yeah, and that is a thing too, like comments on videos, and there's lots of pros and cons, but like, hopefully for those of you out there, listening to our podcast or watching us on YouTube or however you're experiencing this, like, be productive about it, but like, that is another form of communicating with us and with one another, and using the internet in a hopefully productive way to share ideas, including in the comments form.
Yeah,
so
well, I mean, that's
we do encourage
the
that.
root of the word is there. It's community and communication.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, I think this has been a really good episode. I think we've covered a lot of different kind of fun technological developments over the years, but also some really important themes and lessons of things that are bygone and things that remain and things that we should consider bringing back.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think that's a good point to wrap it up. I've been your host, Kyle White.
I'm Trevor White.
And we are the Bygone Bros.
Bye.